This is a case that shocked investigators with its twists and turns and revelations that no one could have expected. And there is a lot to unpack. We're starting in the summer of 2019 in Woodford in North East London. 6 bullets go through the window on the ground floor of a family home. The intended victim is hit twice and falls to the ground. His name is Paul Allen, and he survives the attack, but with life-changing injuries. What no one knows at the time is this shooting is just the latest act in a lengthy spree of organised crime. And it's another 5 years and a discovery of a key piece of evidence until police are able to fully put the whole picture together.
5 years, that is a really long time for anybody to have to wait for justice to be served, but especially if your life's been turned upside down through violent crime.
Yeah, absolutely. An investigation spanning nearly half a decade. I mean, that is going to be some feat of police work, and I'm actually intrigued as to how it was uncovered.
Yeah, it's a complicated case. Let's have a look at how it unfolded.
Woodford is a leafy and upmarket suburb in the northeast of London. But on the night of the 11th of July, 2019, gunshots were heard. The CCTV on nearby houses caught the sound of the gunshots around 11 p.m. at night. I was not involved in the case. I wasn't part of the investigation team or anything like that, but I've worked on many covert operations from the beginning of my career right through to near enough when I left the force. Violence happens everywhere, but it's a shock to the community, not necessarily to police officers, but to the neighborhood. This is not an everyday occurrence. The victim, Paul Allen, had been shot through the kitchen window, and standing nearby was his partner. Mr. Allen's partner screamed loud, and eventually a private security patrol arrived and administered first aid. He received injuries to his thumb and his little finger, which was on his left hand, and another shot went into his throat with a downward trajectory, which ended up on his spinal cord. On arrival at the scene, it's important to gather as much evidence as you possibly can from the testimonies of those who may have seen something or heard something. From a witness's testimony, it appears that one of the perpetrators may have jumped over a fence, vaulted over a fence, and then got to the car, and then it sped off. The position of the vehicle tells me that it must have been premeditated. There had been a plan prior to this to actually get to Mr. Allen, and what happens afterwards, possibly a plan or possibly a panic.
A shocking and brutal act of violence. Rebecca Shahom, what are your initial thoughts?
There's a lot to process with a case like this, and officers going in probably won't know where to start. The main thing that they adopt is this golden hour principle, and we use that term to describe the critical first hour after a serious incident takes place. Swift action is actually vital in that period. You've got to identify the suspects, you've got to gather evidence, and most importantly, in this case, you've got to save a man's life.
My mind is on the victims and the witnesses, because for any victim of violent crime, there's certain emotional responses. There's shock, there's fear, there can be like a numbness or a vulnerability.
And just picking up on that fear element, I mean, police officers have that too. When going to the scene of a shooting, there is going to be that element of fear within them because they're walking into the unknown. They're not only trying to protect themselves, really, but they've got a duty of care to protect everyone at that scene. And the questions they're going to be asking themselves is, was it an organised hit? And where are the suspects now?
Which begs the question, what was the motivation for these people attempting to kill this man in his house?
I want to talk a bit about the victim because he's not just any target. As we said, his name is Paul Allen, and he's actually one of Britain's most notorious armed robbers. In the early 2000s, he established himself in the cage fighting scene. But it's 2006 when he and several others rob a cash depot in Kent. They managed to steal £53 million. It is the biggest ever cash robbery in British history. After that heist, Allen fled to Morocco, but he was eventually extradited back to the UK. And after a trial in 2009, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Now, fast forward to 2016, and Allen is released, and he decides to go back home to his roots in South East London. But moves to Woodford with his partner and 2 younger children after gunmen opened fire on him and his pregnant daughter in the doorway of their home in Woolwich in September 2018. And that is a year before he is shot through his kitchen window and left permanently paralysed from the chest down. Now, before we go any further, I want to go back to that raid on the depot, that robbery he was involved in. And we've got some photos here. Rebecca, you're going to talk us through what went on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that robbery at the Securitas depot. So that depot is actually used by the Bank of England to store millions of pounds worth of currency. So this was actually a sophisticated and very violent heist. So it involved the kidnapping of the depot's manager and his family before holding the workers at gunpoint.
That looks terrifying, doesn't it, when you see it in those photos?
Doesn't it? And then they make off with the banknotes. So the robbery received actually a huge amount of press.
Yeah, here we go, some of the headlines.
Yeah, and can you see here? Paul Allen is at the centre of every single one of those headlines. The investigation resulted in 36 arrests, 8 convictions, and despite those convictions, around £32 million still hasn't actually been recovered. Paul Allen served 6 years of his sentence after admitting conspiracy to kidnap, rob and possess a firearm.
So basically what we have here is a victim who was also involved in a very high-profile robbery. So obviously there's going to be some challenges into readjusting to civilian life after that kind of detention. So he is a victim, but he's also embroiled in the criminal underworld. There might be some desensitization towards violence, like they might see it as part of the cost that you pay for doing business.
What is it like, Rebecca, for police when you're investigating something like this where someone like this is the victim?
Yeah, I mean, the police would have known exactly who Paul Allen was. They would have known his history. They would know of his enemies. But that can only steer an investigation so far. They have to remain open-minded.
Yeah, so we have one of Britain's most notorious armed robbers who's been shot through his kitchen window. We've all this as sort of background of the world he's involved in. But let's take a look now at the evidence that led to police cracking this case here. Rebecca, where did police start with all this?
Yeah, so one of the first tasks of the police was to check CCTV at the Allens' home address and in the surrounding area the night of the shooting and speaking to people in that area. Police were able then to recover this. So the 2 people seen here matching the description of the suspects given by neighbours.
And what exactly did neighbours see?
Right, so the neighbours saw 2 people jump over the rear fence of number 43, the address of the shooting. Forensic officers were able to recover DNA from that fence. An examination of further CCTV footage from that area revealed a getaway vehicle, which was a silver Renault SUV. So using ANPR, which is automatic number plate recognition, the police were then able to trace that licence plate and to link someone to the hire of that vehicle, and that's the man that you see here, who is Stuart Ahern. He hired the car on the 9th of July, 2 days before the shooting.
And there is another reason the 9th of July is a significant date, right?
Absolutely. So on the same date, that night of the 9th of July, the same vehicle was caught on CCTV being used at a robbery in Sevenoaks in Kent, some luxury apartments there. Now, if you look at these images from outside one of the properties in question, you can see these 2 men dressed as uniformed officers. Now, they are actually the same 2 men that were seen at that footage at 43 Melbourne Drive.
Okay.
They were later identified as Daniel Kelly and Louis Ahern.
And we've had a Stuart Ahern who was hiring the car, and he's actually his brother.
Yes.
So, Siobhan, what can we tell from how they're behaving here?
Some aspects of their behaviour is actually quite cunning. It's quite clever, you know, dressing up as police officers. But on the other hand, there's a contrast because some of it is sloppy, leaving the DNA evidence, using the same car to commit different crimes, and of course, using your real name to hire that car.
Yeah, I mean, what do police do next then, Rebecca? What do you do with this?
So, well, crucially, the car driven to hire the Renault was a black Mercedes. Now, police seized that Mercedes and checked its GPS system. And actually, that revealed that that vehicle had been at the Allens' family address 2 weeks prior to the shooting.
OK, so what it means is that the car was hired on the 9th, we know that. On the 10th, using that ANPR again, police were able to work out that it was following a car owned by the Allen family. And then on the 11th, we have that shooting.
So basically, these men have followed Paul Allen for some time, but using different cars.
Yeah, when they have this evidence, how long was it before police were able to make an arrest?
So between October 2019 and January 2020, 3 suspects were arrested for this crime. Now, they denied their involvement, but with the strength of the evidence, it meant that all 3 were charged.
But it would take until 2024 for police to know how the suspects were able to track the vehicle, and it was written testimony from one of them that gave away the clue.
With multiple perpetrators, the fact is somebody's going to tell us something. At some stage, we'll get to one of them. Louis Ahern, he issued his defence statement stating that whilst they were heading back, to Woolwich with the Renault, and they stopped off at John Harrison Way, he said that he had to stop to get some fresh air. And in the meantime, Daniel Kelly had made his way to the River Thames. If you've just committed a serious offence, and attempting to murder somebody, are you going to stop to get some fresh air? Or are you going to stop to get rid of possibly a gun? What the police had was information that these perpetrators were in situ. What they didn't have was the murder weapon. Thames is vast. The police had a certain area where they actually stopped, so they had that location. A special dive team would have been deployed to try and find where possibly the murder weapon had been dumped. The specialist dive team didn't find a gun, but on a cold November morning, they actually found an iPad, and this was embedded in the mud. And within the iPad was a SIM card, which really does surprise me because the fact is it's 5 years later when they found it. And for the forensics analysts to actually extract the data from it, that's massive. And that SIM card had data that actually connected Daniel Kelly to some of the other perpetrators of the gang. It also led to GPS tracking. They got the data from it. The organised crime gang actually placed a tracker on Paul Allen's car so they could follow him. I've placed many of those trackers myself, so I know how easy you can conceal those. You can actually put it under the car, you can put it inside the cabin, you can put it anywhere, and they will not find it or see it unless they look for it. With that tracker, the police were able to unpick what was happening with Paul Allen and then linking it with the perpetrators.
It feels like such a long shot to discover that after such a length of time, right?
Yeah. I know. Can you imagine pulling a tablet like this out of the Thames 5 years after it being discarded and still be able to recover the SIM from it?
Yeah, so this is a photo we have of the iPad. You can see it looks like it's been in the river for a long time. And police were able to still get a lot of evidence off of this that told us more about the links between these men.
Yeah, so critically, Daniel Kelly failed to remove the SIM card from that device before throwing it. That meant when police recovered it, there was so much information still stored on that tablet. And what's really shocking here is whilst not finding the gun may have been actually really quite frustrating, it wasn't needed to take the suspects to trial. And in fact, a huge amount of evidence was able to be recovered from that, which shed a huge amount of light on the case.
Yeah, how much can we say, Shahom, that Daniel Kelly was sloppy not taking the SIM card out of this and just chucking it in a river?
I suppose, generally speaking, when criminals make rookie mistakes, it's because they're overconfident or they're arrogant or they're naive. I'm not sure that I'd say that's the case for Daniel Kelly, because I think most people would not have expected this iPad to be retrieved.
And to go back to the technology, we know the trackers were really crucial in the gang knowing where Paul Allen was.
Yeah, so the members of this organised crime gang had tracked the vehicles of Paul Allen's partner, leading them to his address. Discarding that iPad is one thing, but this CCTV image shows the Ahern stopping to buy bottles of Oasis on the way to Woodford. And that, to me, beggars belief.
Yeah, because what that does is it places them at a Shell garage 90 minutes before the shooting and with the same hire car that was seen leaving the scene. So we've seen a fair bit of these 3 men now. Shahom, can you tell us what we know about their backgrounds? Let's start here.
Sure. So this is Daniel Kelly, and he was 40 years old at the time of the shooting, and he was actually implicated as the shooter in the attempted murder of Paul Allen. And we know that he's got quite an extensive criminal history. So he's had 20 different convictions for 60 offences, and he started shoplifting at the tender age of 11.
Okay, on to these next two then.
So this is Louis Ahern, who was 30 at the time of the shooting, and he's the younger brother to this man, Stuart Ahern, who was 40 years old.
These guys, we know a bit about them being habitual offenders, right? Talk us through what that is.
Yeah, so some people have this tendency to reoffend even after conviction, and the reason for that is nature versus nurture. So in terms of nature, it's about individual character traits such as fearlessness, a lack of empathy, impulsivity, thrill-seeking, and it's also about growing up amongst criminal peers and a lack of opportunity.
Yeah.
But also, sometimes they just don't fear the repercussions. They don't mind going to prison.
And here is the thing, Rebecca, it's not the first time these three men have been linked.
No, a month before the shooting in Woodford, these three men travelled to Switzerland. Have a look at this.
To understand the complexities of the shooting, you have to understand the complexities of another crime that took place in Geneva, in Switzerland. And the two brothers and Daniel Kelly raided a museum and stole 3 artefacts. It was the start of June 2019 when the Museum of Far Eastern Art in Geneva was targeted by thieves. CCTV caught this Renault pulling up outside the museum just after midnight, and out get 3 figures. They're dressed fully in black, they're wearing ski masks, balaclavas, they've fully hidden their faces. They're armed and equipped with a sledgehammer, crowbars, and they managed to wedge open and smash a panel in the front door of the museum. Within 60 seconds, the 3 of them go inside, they manage to shatter some glass casings and then make off with 3 artifacts that date back to the Chinese Ming Dynasty era. But on their escape, one of the burglars managed to scrape their tummy up against the wooden panel of the door that they'd just cut the hole in, and therefore it left a bit of their DNA. Once they'd made their way back to Woolwich, the 2 brothers and Daniel Kelly then set about trying to sell the stolen items.
And those items, by the way, priceless artefacts with an insurance value of £2.8 million. Rebecca, what did they do with them?
Right. Let's go back to June 2019. A few days after the Geneva job, Kelly and the Ahern brothers head back to London with their loot. They fly from London all the way to Hong Kong with the items in tow in the hope of flogging them. They take the stolen bowl to this auction house, and Louis Ahern manages to sell it for 236,000 Hong Kong dollars, and that's the equivalent of around £23,800. He leaves his passport details with staff, which is unexpected in itself.
I mean, unexpected is an understatement. It's baffling to me that they keep leaving these clues. It's like they can't cover up their own breadcrumbs.
Yeah, and Rebecca, what happened next? What after that?
Yeah, well, it turns out the original trio, the Aherns and Kelly, had enlisted a few others to help them shift their goods. But the Met received a tip-off from an auction house that they were trying to flog this Ming vase to and set up an undercover sting. Police officers posed as buyers. Now, in this central London hotel, the criminals enlisted by the original trio handed over the vase in a yellow JD sports bag to undercover officers in exchange for £450,000. And it may be no surprise that they were promptly arrested after.
Yeah, and Louis and Stuart were extradited to Switzerland, where they pleaded guilty to their involvement in that 2022 robbery. They both got 3.5 years in prison and a 5-year ban from Switzerland. Daniel Kelly here is still the subject of an extradition request from the Swiss authorities.
So there's a lot to unpack here. What stands out to me is the fact that they're high-end robbers. So they identify themselves differently to other robbers. They think they're more superior. They often have these ostentatious lifestyles. They have less frequent heists, but they're more risky. So it's higher risk, higher reward.
Okay, so that's all going on in Switzerland. What does it tell us about Paul Allen in Woodford and that shooting?
Well, clearly these 3 men have worked together before. And as we go through the evidence, we can see this pattern. So high-level crime, but also frequent low-level mistakes, which keeps me coming back to this question. Are these guys so brazen that they don't think they can be caught? Or are they 3 cavalier individuals who just can't keep track of their own mistakes?
Earlier on, we heard from the journalist Thomas McIntosh about the trio's trip to Geneva. He was also at the court in London for the trial of the Ahern brothers and Kelly for conspiracy to murder. Let's see what he made of it.
Conspiracy to murder is quite a complicated charge. Effectively, it's a group of people who have come together to try and kill another person. Throughout the entire trial, Paul Allen was not in court. He wasn't asked to give evidence. Daniel Kelly and Stuart Ahern did not give evidence during the trial. However, they did give some prepared statements to police officers when they were giving interviews after being arrested. Daniel Kelly expressed a fear for his life if he gave any information that might allude to who the killer was or what had happened or what the motive might be. So during the actual evidence, all three were very quiet, but we were shown some CCTV from a prison van where Louis had indicated that he was going to give a defence that was going to blame and implicate Daniel Kelly. And on the CCTV, you could hear Daniel Kelly call and yell at Louis Ahern and call him a snitch. The Geneva heist came up in the trial. That's because the prosecution wanted to show that the three men could act together on a high-stakes crime. When the guilty verdicts were read out, Stuart Ahern shouted something over to the jury that was along the lines of, "You are only human." That was it. After that, they were led out of the dock and down to the cells.
Looking at it from the outside, the investigators themselves, they were thorough. They secured 3 convictions. It told me they were determined to get those perpetrators.
You all denied participating in any conspiracy at all, but that does not prevent me from forming a view as to the respective roles of each of you.
Daniel Kelly was absent from the sentencing. He didn't appear, he was not in the dock. The 2 Ahern brothers were. They sat there, listened to the sentence and the remarks as they were read out to them. But when I looked up and glanced at the public gallery, I couldn't really see any family members or friends who were there supporting 2 brothers. They were kind of on their own and just had each other.
The underlying motive for the shooting, on the part of those who instigated it, remains unknown. I have no doubt that this agreement to murder Paul Allen involved other people, apart from the 3 of you, and that you 3 were motivated by a promise of financial gain. I'm satisfied that Daniel Kelly, while not the instigator, was higher up in the organisational chain than Louis Ahern or Stuart Ahern. It was Daniel Kelly who recruited Louis Ahern and Stuart Ahern.
It's about putting these people into prison. But what it also as well is giving justice to the victims. Lots of gangs are around in London and outside London. It's a massive message for those who think it's glamorous that it's not glamorous.
We've just heard Daniel Kelly there being referred to as the recruiter of Stuart and Louis Ahern. How common is that sort of hierarchy in organised crime?
Yeah, it's really, really common. Think of it like a business. You know, at the top of a business, you've got the boss, you've got the workers, and it sort of fans out a bit like a pyramid. But all I will say is there are always more people involved than you think.
Yeah, and Chahom, what do you make of Daniel Kelly referring to Louis Ahern as a snitch?
What we're talking about is gang psychology, which is fascinating to me. It's a form of tribalism. And the 2 main pillars are loyalty and hierarchy, which is what you were talking about with that pyramid. So in terms of loyalty, often these people come from quite deprived backgrounds, so they don't have that familial support. That's why they're attracted to the criminal underworld. And in terms of hierarchy, basically the people at the top, they have the power and control, and the people at the bottom, they have the aspirations to try and rise up the rank. And being a snitch or an informant is a direct affront to all of those values.
Yeah, and in the end, added up, the trio were given 104 years in prison. Daniel Kelly with the longest sentence at 41 years. But it doesn't answer the question of why did they carry out the shooting in the first place? Did police and investigators need to find a motive?
No, so the prosecution's main aim in a case like this is establishing the facts of the offence and the intent of the defendants, rather than why they chose to act the way they did.
And for me, it's all linked to that snitch comment. But the other thing that grabs my attention is the psychological motivations behind trying to kill somebody that's a high-end criminal. So it's usually about eliminating rivals to gain more territory, or eliminating threats like snitches or informants, but also reputation is currency. You have to act back aggressively, because if you don't, then you're seen as vulnerable and weak.
Yeah, and we also heard from the judge just a minute ago, Sarah Whitehouse KC, who also said this, that the underlying motive for the shooting remains unknown. And she says, "I have no doubt that this agreement to murder Paul Allen involved other people, Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, a crime like this with such high-level planning might end with the 3 convictions that we see here, but it doesn't mean that there weren't more co-conspirators.
Yeah, and at the heart of it, it's probably got a financial motivation. But I think we're seeing more than that here. We're seeing the lifestyle of career criminals, so that's normalisation of violence. We have these random, disconnected cases, and they're all brought together by a chance finding of this one piece of evidence.
And a 5-year international crime spree brought to an end by 3 guilty verdicts on conspiracy to murder charges.
The UK has seen off rival bids from the US, France and Germany to seal a multi-billion-pound deal to supply warships to Norway. Under the agreement, BAE Systems will build at least 5 anti-submarine frigates in Glasgow, securing work for up to 4,000 people, including 2,000 at the company's shipyards in the city. Norway's Prime Minister said it was his country's biggest ever defence procurement. Here's Joe Inwood.
Russia poses many security questions for the West. In the North Sea, these are the UK's answer. This computer-generated footage shows Type 26 frigates, specially designed to detect, track and, if necessary, defeat submarines. The UK had already commissioned 8 of them. Now, the news that Norway will buy 5 more.
This is the biggest British warship deal in history. It's a huge vote of confidence in British workers and the British defence industry, securing 4,000 jobs for the next 15 years and beyond, including 2,000 in Scotland, where these warships will be built.
BAE Systems is already constructing HMS Glasgow, due to be at sea by 2028. The government say all 8 British ships and the 5 Norwegian will be finished by the mid-2030s. They claim the expanded order will not result in delays, although HMS Glasgow is already behind schedule. The UK and Norway are close allies. Their forces have trained together for many years. That alliance was crucial in beating rival bids from France, Germany and the US.
We have asked 2 fundamental questions. Who's the best strategic partner for Norway when purchasing new frigates? And can the country that is the best partner for us deliver a competitive frigate? The answer to the first question is the United Kingdom, and the answer to the second is yes. Overall, this is the best frigate for Norway.
Russian submarines in the North Sea have been identified as a key strategic threat to the UK and her allies. Today's announcement is their response to that challenge, but it will be many years before it is fully operational. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
And our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale is with me. Tell us more about the significance of this deal, Jonathan.
Well, first I think you've got to say it's a big win for British shipbuilding. As you heard, the biggest international deal for warships in history as far as the UK is concerned. It also, the government says, delivers on its promise to make defence and the extra investment it's made in defence an engine for economic growth. So you've heard about sustaining 4,000 jobs. I think there is a strategic significance here too. So remember, Norway and the UK are frontline NATO states dealing with the North Atlantic. And they're the ones who have to keep an eye on Russia's northern fleet, specifically those nuclear strategic bombers operating out of Murmansk, and they've been hunting for them earlier this month. They will now be able to do that with a combined fleet of 13 anti-submarine warfare frigates. And they'll also be able to look at critical national infrastructure, undersea cables, which they fear the Russians could target. The sting in the tail here is that there's one shipyard building 8 ships for the Royal Navy, 5 for the Norwegian Navy. The Royal Navy may get some of those ships later than it had hoped for, and the current fleet of anti-submarine frigates it has are really on their last legs, and they need to be replaced. And the big concern, the danger always with big, complex weapon system, is that they are over budget and they're delayed, but they have really got to deliver on this one.
Jonathan Beale, thanks very much.